Today we're traveling to the storybook countryside of Oxfordshire to visit the wonderfully imaginative home of artist and illustrator Matthew Rice.
I came here about 12 years ago with my then wife. We were looking for a place where we could both live and work, to have a studio that we could use for designing the stuff for our pottery business called Emma Bridgewater, her name. And that's where I live now.
From the moment you step into the joyous striped entryway, lovingly painted by one of his daughters, you feel the signature Rice touch. Playful, deeply personal, and bursting with character.
My daughter Kitty Rice painted the stripes on the wall a few weeks ago, in fact only last week over there, and that's one of the things that she does. It's totally changed it. It was very white before and I suddenly got bored of.
Throughout the home, painted surfaces, historic textures, and gathered treasures create a sense of movement and narrative, as though each room is part of an unfolding story.
That all the pictures here mean something to me. They all tell some kind of story or in some way evoke something important.
Outdoors, two loyal hunting dogs trot faithfully at his side as he moves through the garden, a lush and abundant extension of his imagination.
Something a bit odd, you can't see where the heat's coming from and you can't kind of walk towards it. Once it really breaks down, the dogs show you where it is because they lie in the warm places. But I like a proper radiator, so I've got a few of them here which are still doing their job.
So come with us as we step into Matthew Rice's enchanting Oxfordshire retreat and experience the dreamlike world he's brought to life. To watch Matthew's full episode ad-free, be sure to scan the QR code on screen or click the join button below.
Hello Homeworthy, I'm Matthew Rice. Would you like to come and see my house here in Bampton in England?
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story. I'm Alison Kenworthy, the founder of Homeworthy, and we take you inside the world's most beautifully decorated homes and introduce you to the brilliant people who live there.
Hi Homeworthy, I'm Liz Lang. Welcome to Grey Gardens.
Click the join button below to access all of our latest episodes ad-free and watch extended cuts of this and other homes, opening the doors to new rooms and exclusive content featuring our beloved hosts.
I can't wait to see, I'm so excited.
And if you're looking to shop items inspired by this and other Homeworthy tastemakers, be sure to use the product links below or scan the QR code on screen to find fabulous furniture, coffee table books, and accessories that can transform your house into a home.
Hello, my name's Matthew Rice and I am a painter and an illustrator and a writer of books and a teacher of watercolour painting, and I live here in an old house in a village which is about an hour and a half west of Oxford called Bampton, and if you are Downton fans, it is the village of Downton. I came here about 12 years ago with my then wife. We were looking for a place where we could both live and work, to have a studio that we could use for designing the stuff for our pottery business called Emma Bridgewater, her name. And that's where I live now. That studio is where I work and do all my own things. So I grew up in a family where painting was what you did. Both my parents were designers and they both painted all the time and they all worked at home, and I'm an only child, so there was no escape. And I always knew I would do something with a paintbrush in my hand. And that is indeed what happened. I went off to art school and learnt a bit more, and I've been doing that for ages and ages. I took to watercolour because an old lady's husband died and she didn't know what to do with his very expensive paper, which was called Whatman, and through a rather circuitous route it came to land on my desk. And that really was such a lovely material that it made me think this was a thing for me, and that's when I was about 14. So I've been working with watercolour for a long time. Hi, well this is the entrance hall. It's very small. When I arrived here, it had a floor made of hardboard and bits of wood and bits of earth. So I did actually have, one of the few bits of genuinely new building I did was to get some nice big stone slabs to give it a stone entrance. And it's old, it's in the medieval bit of the house, although I think that doorway is probably newer. My daughter Kitty Rice painted the stripes on the wall a few weeks ago, in fact only last week over there, and that's one of the things that she does. It's totally changed it. It was very white before and I suddenly got bored of, I had this idea that everything really old should stay whitewashed, but now we've done nice colours on it and I love that. It goes quite well with these cut paper pictures which my mum, Pat Allbeck, did towards the end of her career. She was a textile designer and she suddenly took to cut paper for the last sort of 5 years and did a lot of these pictures, so all done with unpainted but coloured papers, sort of collages. So those are hers. These I got the other day, funny kind of display flower show vases for someone to put 6 brilliant dahlias or 6 marvellous something or others in, and actually they're just really easy way to do nice bunches all the time. What else? That's a bowl made by a designer called Henry Holland over here. He came and did something here and I got that because I thought he was nice. I couldn't tell you where that table comes from, but it must have come from some junk shop somewhere at some point. What else is in here? That's a picture I did. You can't get it straight, whichever way you make it go. It's slightly bent one way or the other. Stripes on stripes obviously is a really bad idea. And then I filled in that fireplace with some logs, which come and go, but not at this time of year because it's no fires yet. And there's a few hats. One from Portugal, one from Kenya, and one I've no idea where the silver one comes from. It's a very suspect kind of hat. We're missing some other hats which sometimes sit on there, but they come and go. That lantern I got from on eBay and in a very unlikely house in a sort of military camp town near here, and I went into married quarters and there it was for £20. So there's a little bit of nice thrift shopping going on as well. This is my little sitting room. I'm not a great sitter down, I have to admit. I sit down at the table when I'm eating and I sit down to work, but I don't sit down very much. But other people like to sit down, and this little room was exactly that. And it's got quite a lot of art books here. It's that confusing thing of thinking it would be a smart idea to do them by colour, which isn't bad because you know what colour things are, but no one else does. So I should probably give up on that, but there's all books to do with individual painters. What else is in here? Well, my dad was a theatre designer. He designed the sets and costumes for operas and ballets, so that's a bit of a Four Seasons he did for Kenneth Macmillan at Covent Garden, and then there are endless little miniature tables and miniature chairs and all that kind of thing that were the models that went on the sets, and there's a few little bits of medieval bits and bobs. What are those? A picture by my sister-in-law, and I think that was a design for an opera called Punch and Judy of my dad's. Quite a lot of his things in here. Those are some pictures he did in Greece many years ago. There's a picture my mum did of a tiny me. That's a very old bit of an opera set, of an opera called Dr. Miracle in about 1950. So that's a kind of mixture. This was a piano I designed the case for about 30 years ago. It was white when it started. Sycamore starts white and goes very, very dark gold. But that's that. Another one of my mum's pictures. I mean, I'm really serious about the paintings. I don't think of them as sort of buying the art for the room. They all mean something and they're all to do with somebody. I think they're really important. They're the windows in the room. They're a view out. And so what you're looking at and what they're like I think it's too important just to sort of have random things that don't mean much. So everything in here is either by someone I know. That's by a painter called Charles Tunnicliffe. Those are things of my dad's. You can see how carefully looked after and how much I come in here by the fact that a rose is at least 4 feet into the room now, but then it is summer. There's quite a lot of plants growing inside here. I don't like a house plant, but I don't mind something from the outside coming in. But I think that's quite a nice sofa. I got it from someone else, but it's one of those companies that make sofas that people like. And what's over here, that's my great-grandfather, who was a rabbi in Poland. I don't know, various. Those are all mugs I did for my dad when his dogs died. Those are some things I made years and years ago. That's another opera set. So it's an element, there's probably quite a lot of stuff to do with my father's work in here, and it's quite a sort of cosy room. You can cram people in here, but it's probably quite cosy to sit on your own in. So the kitchen, I have done a bit of changing. It had various dividing walls. It was very, very small. This house had been lived in by another old bloke on his own for a long time, but in a rather more basic way. So I have done several nice things. The best thing was taking up a concrete tiled floor and finding that the old flagstones, which probably went down in the 17th century, were all there underneath and ready to go. And so all I had to do was to give it a sweep afterwards, and we were away. I live in this room basically more than anywhere else, and I sit at that table, I eat there, and it's kind of quite a nice, neat size. It's not too small, and if there's 2 or 3 people, there's loads of room. That little green bench was did the same job in my parents' kitchen. Those 2 pictures on there, which are of Syros in Greece, I think my dad did in about 1955, and it took me ages to realise the one on the right was a detail of the one on the left. But I really like them. I feel with that bench they give you a little tiny moment of Greece over there. A very nice and clever shopping friend of mine got me those 2 plate racks because there isn't really room for a dresser in here. It's not that kind of room, I don't think. I've always had a dresser in the kitchen, but they do the job quite nicely here, or else you'd be endlessly walking into everything. And she also found that nice kitchen table, which is important because narrow is what you need in here, so as not to completely fill in the space. There is an Aga over here, which is a prerequisite of all good English kitchens. That's been here since I think 66, and then it got restored when we got here, and then I've had to do it again, but it is a proper job, nice, cosy, cream, sadly 2-door Aga. Look, some of them have 4, some of them have 2. Those are the 2, and 4 is more fun because you can do more stuff, but it's absolutely fine. What else is nice in here? Well, then I made a frightful mistake and thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a piece of copper behind this cooker, which is obviously a cleaning nightmare. And as soon as you start cooking, the whole thing gets covered in grease and dust and starts going green again. And I probably would never, ever do it again, but it does make quite a nice warm glow. I meant to say when we were by the Aga that I made the tiles over there, which was a really nice project. I went up to a tile factory, it wasn't mine, and made a whole load of tiles. And some of them have got the house on, some of them have got the church in this village, some the coat of arms of the man who built this house, who was called Emma de Valence, who was Lord Pembroke, and they feature in various places, but it's quite a nice thing to have done one's old tiles, and you can see them all around here. Longing to get rid of this oven. I haven't used it. It's been in there for 12 years, and I'm not a great one for an electric oven, so one day it's going to turn into a cupboard and my life will suddenly become fulfilling and happy. You can't really see out because the roses have covered up, although you'll notice they're not coming in yet in this room, but they're definitely covering outside quite well at the moment. I don't have much in the way of kitchen plant sort of machines. I never had a microwave or any of those things. I don't know what an air fryer is. People talk about them. I've got a frying pan, but that's rather different. And I don't have a lot of sort of gear in the kitchen. I've got a dishwasher. That's about as far as it goes. I was saying earlier that all the pictures here mean something to me. They all tell some kind of story or in some way evoke something important. And these 2, no exception. The one on the top, my daughter Kitty, she of the stripes in the hall, did when she was living in Mexico City for 3 years. And so it's a really nice reminder of that time as I went to stay with her 3 times, which was lovely. And the one below, I just love those radishes. I grow a lot of radishes, and a now disappeared friend of mine painted that probably 40 years ago. She was a great painter of flowers, but she had a bit of a weakness for a small animal as well, and she did some very sweet small mice pictures. They were dead mice, but they were made to look not that dead. And at one point, she found in an exhibition the mice were selling well. So I found her in a corner of the place where she was having it, painting new mice, because she had a stock in the freezer as models. But no mice in her radish picture. This is the parlour. When I started doing this, Jackie, my housekeeper, called it the breakfast room. But as the light happens in the afternoon and the evening, I didn't think you could genuinely call it the breakfast room. And also, I've never had breakfast in it. So parlour it became. It's one of the many tables I sit down and eat at. It's really nice if you've got 6 people. It is part of the archway of the original castle gatehouse. So it's got these great big shafts of columns which were their way in. You'll see later what they support upstairs. And it was again a room that needed a little bit of tender loving care, but I haven't made any great changes to it, except there was a door here. It's one of those rooms that had so many doors, it was basically all doorway. So I got rid of one, and it had for about 5 years just a white rectangle, and then my daughter, the striping daughter, did an imitation bit of old plaster. So this is the real old plaster here, and that's mocked up old plaster there, to look as if it is the same as everything else. And that's a picture I've known all my life by someone called Jane Venables. That's one by someone called Mary Fedden. And I've known those ever since I've been grown up, I suppose. I love a dresser full of pottery. A lot of my working life was spent designing ceramics, so I have a real interest in them. And one of the great pleasures is reshuffling and changing it round. And so this has gone green at the moment. I love fiddling with pottery. There's quite a lot in here too, look. And so quite a lot of drink and glasses too. But I mean, this is now slightly the stuff that's hiding was out there. But you'll see in other places big dressers full of china, and it's the way to see it. I have got cupboards full of it too, because it's my kind of interest. What else? That table there was my parents' kitchen table, and before that was the kitchen table of my godfather, who was a famous choreographer called Frederick Ashton. And so I've known about the history of that table certainly for 70 years of its life, I suppose. And it's been scrubbed. It's oak, but it's been scrubbed so many times that when you run your hand, you can feel all the raised bits of the grain of it, because it's just been scrubbed with salt again and again and again. But it's a really nice, neat-sized table. So it was in the middle and may yet go back. It's a better table than this. And this is some nice Windsor chairs, quite comfortable to sit in. And then in the winter, there's a fire roaring in there. There was a big fireplace over here, and I thought, how nice, we're going to have a great roaring fire. But it smoked and smoked and smoked, and I kept making up imaginary sizes to see, well, it couldn't possibly still smoke if you raised it or dropped it or brought it in. And I ended up with this tiny sort of telly-sized hole for the fire. But that now doesn't smoke and does make the house really nice and cosy. And so there's, in the winter, always a fire burning in there. This house had no heating when I came here, so it was quite chilly, and I put some in. And I've used big reconditioned old iron radiators, because I really like leaning against radiators, and I think underfloor heating, which I've got in the studio, is nice, but it's just kind of spooky. It's something a bit odd. You can't see where the heat's coming from, and you can't kind of walk towards it. Once it really breaks down, the dogs show you where it is because they lie in the warm places. But I like a proper radiator, so I've got a few of them here which are still doing their job. As I said, this is a house full of little rooms. There aren't any really big ones, and the dining room is no exception. So it probably does fit 10 people, and that's about it, which is enough for me. And it's the other half of the medieval archway into the castle. In fact, it's got 2 Gothic 14th century arches, one which would have gone into the sort of gatekeeper's house and one into the stair that went upstairs. So it's probably got the most medieval bits of anywhere downstairs, although I'll show you a few other bits. It's a sort of relatively straightforward dining room. I use it in the winter mainly. It doesn't get used much in the summer. I try and eat outside all summer. And if I don't, I tend to be in the kitchen. But in the winter, it's nice and cosy. I did actually do a violence and get rid of a very boring Victorian fireplace because I felt we had enough fireplaces and that this room was warm. When I came here, this also had a sort of plywood floor in some places, and in others a few old broken boards. And I noticed two things in the first year. One was that the snow blew under the window and landed in a pile in the room where the wind had blown it. And the other was that a mole dug up through the boards, and I found a mole walking across the floor. So I knew it was time to do something slightly better about the floor. And I found all the old floorboards from all the rooms that we weren't using and made an old wooden floor. A few pictures in here. These are more of mine. Those are churches from Norfolk where I used to live, and that's Wickmere on top and Burnham Overy Town beneath. And that's a Norfolk view. Another bigger dresser full of less green pottery. All sorts, some things, a few old things designed by my father and some nice manganese. There's purple Delft tiles. That colour is made with manganese oxide. And all sorts of nice, ordinary 19th century pottery, but a few 18th century bits, but mainly English. And Lord knows what's in the cupboards at the moment. A lot of old rubbish and candles. And then I think that's probably all that's here. I have got a lantern that hangs in the middle of here in the winter with candles in, and I tend to light this with candles on the whole. And it's got some floor lights, but otherwise it's my concession to modernity because I wanted to light these nice stone columns here because they're so nicely carved. So there's a light at the bottom of each one, which just slightly shows you the profiles of the mouldings. And that was what you faced when you came into the castle. So they're the two sort of gate posts of the way in. It's got quite good shutters, so you can keep it cosy in the winter by closing the shutters in there. I had to lower the window a tiny bit, or at least the shutters around it, because the bath on top was so heavy that the builders said you're going to have to make a sort of goal post to hold it up. So there was a little bit of remedial work there. Otherwise, old rugs, old furniture, and pictures by me. This is a genuinely old house by any standards, by English standards. So it was built in 1320 by a great man of that time, and it was a castle, and he built it, and then he was kidnapped. He went off to see the Pope in Avignon, where the Pope then was, and he was both kidnapped, so he lost his money and his health, and he only had daughters, and so one way and another the house fell into disrepair as it passed from hand to hand. But it stayed in the family of his descendants until about 1860, when one of the Oxford colleges bought it, and we bought it from them in about 2012. So it's had 3 careful owners since 1320. In fact, I think he owned it for some time before. I think it may have had 3 careful owners since 1200. When I came to this house, it was a working, rather tired working farm, so surrounded by big modern steel frame buildings. You couldn't even see the front of the house. It was completely hidden by these great barns. So the first job was to start knocking things down, and we knocked down about 70% of the square footage of the buildings on the site, and then gradually started putting back together a courtyard in front of the house and trying to let the medieval nature of the house shine through a bit. This spiral staircase here goes up first to the bathroom and then on up to my son's bedroom up in the attics. And it's old, it's built in 1320. It's got this really brilliant sort of carved underside. Most spiral staircases you have the steps going both ways, but it shows that it was quite a high status bit of building at the time because it's terribly thin. It's just got this little sort of shelf of stone going around, and it's the way I go upstairs normally at night. And there's a few pictures by my daughter there and some nice plaster animals made by a friend of mine called Dido Crosby. And the lantern that's supposed to go in the dining room was waiting there with a jar of cement, bag of cement, until time to put it up. Maybe come through here into the hall. This is the inside of one of the arrow slits in the wall. And the reason the wall is so thick, the wall goes from here right back to there. So it's about 7 foot deep, this wall. And these embrasures were cut into it so you could fire your arrows through there at some approaching enemy. I don't think this house ever saw any action, but nevertheless the idea is there, and it lets rather a nice spooky light into the hall. 3 pictures here which show what the house might have been like. Some of them are fairly definitely what it was like. Some of them I've had to use a bit of imagination, but I wanted to recreate the idea of this as a busy medieval castle. And here you can see it with the moat, which we've now mainly redug, but with a bridge coming in. And you can see there's only a little bit of it left now. This is a sort of aerial duck's eye view flying over the castle with the village in the background. And gives you an idea of a busy, big castle court. We think only one wall was built, and that's what it might have looked like from inside the castle looking out. And if you look at the archway in the middle, those are the rooms we've been in. The dining room door you can see, and the vault, which you'll see in my bedroom, are all still there now. So this is the drawing room, one of the many pianos in this house. This one was bought by my grandfather from the Bechstein showroom in Berlin in 1933. So it's had a colourful life. It went first to Hull, where he lived. It went to London and was taken to a 3rd floor sitting room there. They had to take the window frames out and bring it in with a crane. Then it came down, it's been to Norfolk, and then it lived in Oxford for a bit, and now it's come here, slightly restored. So it's had a lot of travels in its nearly 100-year life. It's one of 3 Bechsteins, luckily. This is the drawing room. It's one of those rooms, and people say they never use their drawing room. I do in the winter. It's got a really nice fire that burns well, and when I've got lots of people, I love being in here. It's probably got more in it than anything else. That was a pheasant I knew when it was alive, called Matthew Golden, and when it died, its owner had it stuffed and gave him to me. So it's the sort of survival of I had a bit of a feeling for taxidermy, but it's kept to a bare minimum, and he's representing the interest in here. There are a lot of Victorian Staffordshire jugs on the wall, which were a passion of my father's. He collected them, so they have found a very easy home in this drawing room. Having worked in Staffordshire, in Stoke-on-Trent, most of my working life, I've also got a feeling for them, but this particular sort of salt glazed and these very bold colours and contrasting white modelling was a big thing of sort of ordinary jugs made in Staffordshire between about 1840 and 1900, and there's probably 100 of them. Various decoy ducks, lots of them bought driving across the States. Tablecloth, weirdly, is one of the few bits of cloth I've designed in here, but which has crept in to cover a rather dreary table. The little Moorish table here has been a big part of my life. It's terribly hard to imagine now, but when I was a child, I used to spend a lot of time making a den underneath there. I haven't tried recently. I actually probably think I couldn't get in there, but it was always a place that I had a camp and lived in my parents' house, so I've known that one very well from inside and out. Various paintings by friends of mine, friends of my parents. That bit of mirror, pub mirror, was also something I've known. It was in the hall of my childhood home, so I've known that very well indeed. And indeed this table, which I think a friend came to stay, bought and left, and it's been there ever since. This is an extraordinary Victorian watercolour box, or even earlier than Victorian, full of, no doubt, villainously poisonous early 19th century watercolours, still sitting there in their pans. I have painted something with it. More pictures. Those are my mum's again, paper cuts. Those are my parents and me in a stripy jersey and slightly suspect corduroy flares, painted by a man called Harry Moore Gordon, who was a great watercolourist. More pictures of my parents, costume designed by a man called Carl Toms. My godfather painted the cats. There's a man called Billy Chappell, who was a dancer and choreographer and designer, but very keen on cats. That cat changes into an owl as you look at it, sort of. And this is actually a model of the castle as it was. So at the moment, all that's left is that. And that doorway there is the archway in. So that's the parlour and my bedroom and my son's attic, but that's all been cut off now. And that's the last bit of the wall, but that gives you an idea what a huge place it must once have been. I did those tiles last year, try and brighten up a rather dingy, falling to pieces fireplace. My mum, I can't think how she could possibly have had time for doing it, but she became a great one for needlepoint. And that was our cat, who was called Jolly at one point, and then she made me a nice chicken one, and I don't know who the butterfly was. It seems to have ended up with me, and that was a picture of, we used to go and stay in a friend's house in the Bahamas, and that was a picture of the view from the garden of their house. So there's a little bit of family history in needlepoint there. These cushions are a really marvellous Geoffrey Benison fabric, which were some curtains that came out of somebody else's skip. And they moved around all of our houses until the moths finally devoured most of them, and now they've been reduced to cushions instead. But they've still lived on for a long time. I've got two places to work. One is the big studio where I am a lot of the time, but this is really nice for times when that's busy with other people and other things. And it's cosy. I've got a big fire which roars away, full of old rubbish at the moment because it's the middle of the summer. But in the winter, this keeps very warm with the fire, and I've got a nice standing-up desk. I've got all my sketchbooks in here, which I have been keeping all my grown-up life, and they go further back. I've got these are mine. I've got one of my mum's here, full of fashion prints from the 50s that she was doing then. Got one of my dad's, full of designs for some production again. I think that's a Winter's Tale at the Old Vic in 1950. That's a really odd sketchbook from about 1800 of someone's very curious drawings. But I've got a wall full of sketchbooks. I keep doing them all the time. And then this has got quite a lot of my books in. Certainly everything about architecture is here. And that's all sort of design architecture. That's all cottages and farmhouses. That's all art and craft from design from around the world. It's a bit of garden. That's a sort of strange mixture of travel books. So there's some form of order. I wouldn't say there was much order. I might just show you what's on the mantelpiece here, because it's such a strange mixture of things. So whether that was an invitation for someone's party, some of these are just sort of cut out bits that are left over. That was a book plate a friend of mine did at school. That's a nice little design for something. That was a bit of plasterwork that came out of a cinema demolished when I was a child that my father and I went to pad around in the demolition ruins of. That's some bits of stuff I've made, like that candlestick or that little house. That was a tin my father designed for the late Queen's Silver Jubilee in 77. That was my nice picture I bought the other day of my godfather in a sale. I think by him probably, and that was a picture by my art master by him, which I also bought in a sale. That's another of my parents, my mother's big paper cuts. I think that was the first one she did, and there are a few little bits of sort of theatre model. There's rather a marvellous Indian textile stall from a market, I think from Lakme or something like that. That's a tiny flower pot that must have come from a royal greenhouse, because it's got GR and a crown in the middle. Someone gave me at some point. That's a fun. I don't know what that little book is. Some things just end up here. It's a little tiny French novel. Maybe it's very rude. It's called Return to My Bedroom, so I think it might be. A few bits of mug and invitation, and another of my parents' dogs. I think that my work as an illustrator and as a painter is quite rooted in my surroundings here. I'm a really keen gardener, and the garden here is a big inspiration for what I do, whether it's doing designs for Emma Bridgewater or whether it's painting or illustrating things for myself. So to that extent, the house is probably very central to my practice. One of the amazing things about this house is how much room there is, and having a large studio has probably been the main reason I started doing courses and teaching people to paint, because I've got all the room to teach them in and to give people lunch in and to cook it and everything else. And so I suppose the house has shaped that bit of my career quite a lot. We are upstairs in my bedroom, which is quite an extraordinary room. So we're at the top of the archway into the castle. So this arch here is the top of the arch that you would have gone through on your horse or with your crumbling old medieval carriage into the courtyard. And around us, as I look up from my bed, is the vault of the ceiling of this archway. In fact, there was no floor in this room and no wall behind us. So it was one big void, one big space that you went through. And sometime, probably in the 16th century, it got divided up. And maybe 17th. This fireplace is 17th century. And I didn't really bother to do much decorating in here because it seemed that the plaster was such a nice soft texture and such a nice colour that where I could just leave it, I just put some wax on top of it so it wasn't absolutely roaring down with dust, and made a nice sort of texture of a wall. It's got some pictures by two painters, mid-century painters, Mary Fedden and Julian Trevelyan. And then if you look, another one there. And behind there, I started one of the many projects one starts in life and doesn't finish. I thought I'd make it look as if it was all tiled, so I did an artificial tiled wall. And then I think I found it too annoying, all the paint kept running, so I stopped eventually. But it was a moment of that. That cushion, weirdly, has got my watercolour of tulips on, I've just seen. And that must have turned into a Bridgewater cushion at some time. And it's a very, very nice place to wake up in here. You don't get morning light, you get evening light. But I mean, who the hell sits in a bed in the evening? But you do get a lovely view out there into the fields and onto the woods I planted when I got here. That material there is designed by me, actually, the fig fabric on that sofa. We could probably get rid of that, look, and you could see it more. It's a whole great forest of figs, which I did, I should think, about 3 years ago, and covered a slightly worn out sofa that was my grandmother's sofa, and it's nice, but it's got that because of endless dogs who sleep on it, of course, all the time. And that fire works really well, so if it's winter I often have a fire in here. It's nothing nicer than having a fire when you go to sleep. It's like the biggest treat, I think, to have that. That's my shirt, that's my trousers, that's all my other stuff. My bathroom is the other side of the vaulted void of the arch, and I did have to do a little bit of shuffling around here. First I moved the doorway so that you could see the whole way with this sort of axis from west to east, so you got a bit more of the idea of coming in and out. And then I had to do this incredibly lethally dangerous step to get the water to the basin, because one of the problems with a listed ancient house is you can't really interfere with the walls very much unless you're building new invented ones. So I had to do quite a lot under the floor, but I did break out and put a wooden floor in here. I've got quite a nice big bath. There's a spot of bother going on here. This wisteria has really taken to invading, and it will have to be cut away soon, because that's why it's really so dark as you're looking through this underwater jungle. And it snakes in. Look, it's always trying to find somewhere to go. A few years ago it snaked in so powerfully it broke one of those stone mullions, so I had to cut it down. But I think it's probably, I haven't looked at it for a bit. It's very nice when you're in the bath looking up at it. And as long as it doesn't get too big, it flowers really early in February, so you get 2 lots of wisteria, one above your head. In fact, I could probably, now I think about it, get it up onto that nail, look. That would be nice. And it can grow along the arch. I hadn't thought about that. Anyway, it will eventually probably. I mean, I'm not a great one for shutting the window, so it doesn't shut anyway because it's covered in that. But that's made rather a strange sort of jungly place. Like, otherwise, I've got a few pictures done by my godfather in the 20s of ballet dancers and people having a nice time then. And it's about as nice a bathroom as I can imagine, frankly. It's got the same lovely vault on top with these huge metal staples holding some cracked bit together, so maybe it will fall down and kill me in the bath eventually, but let's hope not. This fireplace bedroom is probably the only real medieval room, because the others are all chopped out of other medieval rooms. This would have been the place where you stayed in the gatehouse. Gatehouses sound like they're just the way in, but they were quite a high status bit of a medieval building, and if you were visiting you would probably be put up maybe in this bedroom. So it's got a much sort of printed and reproduced medieval 14th century fireplace there, again absolutely 1320, and this lovely medieval window here. That would have had a hole so you could have sat sideways on like that, but when light was hard to come by, you'd use this light in order to do whatever on earth you were doing in here, embroidering or reading some scroll or whatever happened. That huge cupboard was a present from a friend of mine. It was too big to find a seller at auction and too big for his house. It was very nearly too big for anyone to carry in about 6 parts up into this room, but we got it there, and that's got a whole load of old suits. And my daughter, Kitty, has, I don't know whether she's finished or whether it's still on the way, started doing a mural in here with those nice cowgirls trotting around. Who knows what's going to happen with that? I think it might go a bit further in due course, but I shall wait and see. You always have to wait and see what's going to happen next. The fire doesn't work in here. I'm not sure there may be a chimney, but it's not one that I've used for the 10 years I've been here. Because this house is 800 years old, there's always quite a lot of work to do, and there has been, certainly this year, the builder's been here all year, whether it's repainting or mending or fixing some of the many holes that spring in the roof. It's roofed in Cotswold slate, which is a lovely material, but it goes wrong. And it's just a big site, so there's always things to do in the rather unattractive underground side of one's life. But I hope you don't notice it when you look around, because there's endless small jobs that keep the thing more or less up to scratch. I am a really keen gardener, and I love my kitchen garden, and most of all I love my greenhouse, which is a place obviously where you can work on every day of the year. At the moment it's in late summer jungle mode, because almost everything is overtaken by these great morning glory vines and sparmanias and coleuses and marigolds, but it does all sorts of jobs with tomatoes, and this was all sweet peas early in the summer, and it's about 10 years old, and it's full of lush green jungly nature at the moment, but when the frosts come it will suddenly look like a cool empty space in a kind of plant factory. Come through into here, because this is the kind of HQ of garden work. It's a rather good kabir growing all over this wall. That seems to have appeared this year. This is my potting shed where Ben, who does the garden with me, and I work, and where we produce all the plants for the garden. We grow almost everything ourselves, so these are all things for next year: foxgloves and calendula and antirrhinums and larkspur and Chinese delphiniums, Lord knows, all sorts of things. So we start everything off in here. So it's a very important part of the garden. There are all the tools, supposed to be kept in neat order, and they look all right at the moment. Here's a very extraordinary courgette called tromboncino, which looks like a sort of medieval mace, and is a big, they've had lots of them growing, hanging up. Some of them fell down yesterday, I noticed. I think you could do quite a lot of damage with this if you let it get away. I love the old tools. I think that they tend to be much, much better. The steel is better, the handles are better, and I very rarely buy new forks and spades. They're much cheaper, the old ones, and much better. And some of them are particularly good for one job, some for another. So if you think, why has this mad man got 12 forks? It's probably because they do 6 different jobs, and because 2 of us are gardening, so we quite often both need one. These are onions and garlic harvested this year, hanging up, well, they're dry now really, but hanging up to store. Those are all potatoes in sacks. And then there are various nice things from the garden. At the moment we've got some really big aubergines, or eggplants if you're in the States, and all sorts of chilies and courgettes and beans and nice things. These were there because I had an open garden yesterday, so I was just doing a little bit of a vegetable show display. Otherwise, this is the potting bench and covered in compost and pots. We're looking over the garden here from this tower. I really like a lookout. It's nice to look down and that sort of semi-aerial view. It's a good way of keeping an eye on what's going on. A friend of mine built this with my son as his assistant, although he's gone on to build others on his own. That's now what he does. And it's a really nice place when it's a really hot, dry summer day, because the breeze catches you up here and you can get a nice, slightly cool moment. And it's dry when it's raining, so you can sit in the pouring rain and look at the garden if that's what you really want. I like being outside, so a table outside is really important. It's a really good place to eat up here on a hot summer day. It catches the breeze, and on a rainy day you can still be outside with the rain pouring down outside, looking down onto the garden. The kitchen garden is my real passion in the garden. I love growing things to eat and flowers to pick, and this is where I do it. But originally the bit we're looking down on was a big concrete barn and a sort of concrete cattle yard, and the orchard looking over there was also buildings, and indeed the bit behind us was all buildings. So this is a completely newly invented bit of sort of garden landscape here, because this was very, very different 10 years ago. But gardens are quick. Trees grow quick, and all the flowers and vegetables just grow every year. So it's been a fairly easy and quick transformation, but it's still going on. I put a wall around it about 4 years ago, which has made it a much nicer place to work. Come on, get in. So this is the kitchen garden where I grow all the veg and the flowers. Here are lots of zinnias, which are my favourite flower of all. And then there's a bit of croquet lawn here. And then we go into the kitchen garden proper. And even at the end of the summer, there's still quite a lot of flowers going, quite a lot of nicotianas, scabious, calendula, next year's foxgloves, lots of morning glory, ipomoea. We're getting to the end of the summer, so some of those things are slightly finished. All these delphiniums have done, but there are still some snapdragons, lovely geraniums here, so really still working, and the end of the dahlias and veg. So this is my kind of productive garden, and I do more or less live off this all summer. It's full of beets and carrots and all that crab apples, which will make a lot of jelly soon. It's been an amazing year for fruit. I mean, they're literally weighed down. Look at the extraordinary quantity of fruit on there. Get on. There we go, and then back into the front of the house again. There's a couple of nice flowery borders and a few places to sit. And there you can see the wisteria that you saw on the inside of the bathroom growing in. So basically it's taking over. This is the front of the house again. So we've been the whole way around. I hope you liked it. This is my studio here, which is where I do all my teaching and where I do most of my work. And so I've got two huge tables full of work, endless plan chests full of pictures past, and pottery, mugs I've done, a couple of hundred of my favourite mugs, and then current work is all in here. So, I mean, that's a book I'm doing at the moment, all about here. That's a whole load of, that's next year's calendar, sneak preview. That's absolutely nothing of any interest. These are some tea towels, designs for them. So there's all sorts of things. This is so I know where on earth everything is. And then there are all sorts of old designs and old things I've made. But this is a really nice big room to teach in. You can get a dozen people in here, but also it's very luxurious for just 2 or 3 of us to work in. This house is quite big. It's got lots of rooms, but luckily they are all quite small, and that makes for quite a good flexibility as one's life and family shrinks or grows. I'm very lucky. I live with one of my daughters and her family at the moment. She lives in a house on the other side of the yard. But quite often I'm here alone, so it would be rather mad to have a house full of huge rooms. A vast family kitchen would have no great place for me, because I'd be sitting in the corner of it having a small on-your-own supper. So I think probably it's quite a good house to expand and shrink in, but I have a lot of people to stay, and I have lots of children and now a grandson, so I think it's probably quite a good adaptable, strange medieval space. Bye-bye, Homeworthy. Thank you so much for coming to look at my house. I hope you come again. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.